Chapter 26 of A Daughter of the Snows by Jack London. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 26 Frona woke, slowly, as though from a long dream. She was lying where she had fallen, across Corliss's legs, while he, on his back, faced the hot sun without concern. She crawled up to him. He was breathing regularly with closed eyes, which opened to meet hers. He smiled and she sank down again. Then he rolled over on his side and they looked at each other. "Vance!" "Yes." She reached out her hand. His closed upon it and their eyelids fluttered and drooped down. The river still rumbled on, somewhere in the infinite distance, but it came to them like the murmur of a world forgotten. A soft languor encompassed them. The golden sunshine dripped down upon them through the living green, and all the life of the warm earth seemed singing. And quiet was very good. 15 long minutes they drowsed and woke again. Frona sat up. I was afraid," she said. "Not you." "Afraid that I might be afraid," she amended, fumbling with her hair. "Leave it down. The day merits it." She complied with a toss of the head which circled it with a nimbus of rippling yellow. "Tommy's gone," Corliss mused, the race with the ice coming slowly back. "Yes," she answered. "I rapped him on the knuckles. It was terrible, but the chance is we've a better man in the canoe, and we must care for him at once. Hello, look there!" Through the trees, not a score of feet away, she saw the wall of a large cabin. "Nobody in sight. It must be deserted, or else they're visiting, whoever they are. You look to our man, Vance. I'm more presentable, and I'll go and see." She skirted the cabin, which was a large one for the Yukon country, and came around to where it fronted on the river. The door stood open, and as she paused to knock, the whole interior flashed upon her in an astounding picture, a cumulative picture, or series of pictures, as it were. For first she was aware of a crowd of men, and of some great common purpose upon which all were seriously bent. At her knock they instinctively divided, so that a lane opened up, flanked by their pressed bodies, to the far end of the room. And there, in the long bunks on either side, sat 2 grave rows of men. And midway between, against the wall, was a table. The table seemed the center of interest. Fresh from the sun dazzle, the light within was dim and murky, but she managed to make out a bearded American sitting by the table and hammering it with a heavy caulking mallet. And on the opposite side sat St. Vincent. She had time to note his worn and haggard face before a man of Scandinavian appearance slouched up to the table. The man with the mallet raised his right hand and said glibly, "You do most solemnly swear that what you are about to give before the court—" He abruptly stopped and glowered at the man before him. "Take off your hat," he roared, and a snicker went up from the crowd as the man obeyed. Then he of the mallet began again. "You do most solemnly swear that what you are about to give before the court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God." The Scandinavian nodded and dropped his hand. "One moment, gentlemen." Frona advanced up the lane which closed behind her. St. Vincent sprang to his feet and stretched out his arms to her. "Frona!" he cried. "Oh, Frona, I am innocent!" It struck her like a blow, the unexpectedness of it, and for the instant, in the sickly light, she was conscious only of the ring of white faces, each face set with eyes that burned. Innocent of what? She thought, and as she looked at St. Vincent, arms still extended, she was aware in a vague, troubled way of something distasteful. Innocent of what? He might have had more reserve. He might have waited till he was charged. She did not know that he was charged with anything. "Friend of the prisoner," the man with the mallet said authoritatively, "bring a stool for'ard, some of you." "One moment." She staggered against the table and rested a hand on it. "I do not understand. This is all new." But her eyes happened to come to rest on her feet, wrapped in dirty rags, and she knew that she was clad in a short and tattered skirt, that her arm peeped forth through a rent in her sleeve, and that her hair was down and flying. Her cheek and neck on one side seemed coated with some curious substance. She brushed it with her hand, and caked mud rattled to the floor. "That will do," the man said not unkindly. "Sit down. We're in the same box. We do not understand, but take my word for it, we're here to find out. So sit down." She raised her hand. "One moment." "Sit down," he thundered. "The court cannot be disturbed." A hum went up from the crowd, words of dissent, and the man pounded the table for silence. But Frona resolutely kept her feet. When the noise had subsided, she addressed the man in the chair. "Mr. Chairman, I take it that this is a miners' meeting." The man nodded. "Then, having an equal voice in the managing of this community's affairs, I demand to be heard. It is important that I should be heard." "But you're out of order, Miss Wells," half a dozen voices prompted. "Miss Welles," he went on, an added respect marking his demeanor, "it grieves me to inform you that you are out of order. You had best sit down." "I will not," she answered. "I rise to a question of privilege, and if I am not heard, I shall appeal to the meeting." She swept the crowd with her eyes, and cries went up that she be given a fair show. The chairman yielded and motioned her to go on. "Mr. Chairman and men, I do not know the business you have at present before you, but I do know that I have more important business to place before you. Just outside this cabin is a man probably dying from starvation. We have brought him from across the river. We should not have bothered you, but we were unable to make our own island. This man I speak of needs immediate attention." "A couple of you nearest the door go out and look after him," the chairman ordered. "And you, Doc Holliday, go along and see what you can do." "Ask for a recess," St. Vincent whispered. Frona nodded her head. "And, Mr. Chairman, I make a motion for a recess until the man is cared for." Cries of "No recess!" and "Go on with the business!" greeted the putting of it, and the motion was lost. "Now, Gregory," with a smile and salutation as she took the stool beside him, "what is it?" He gripped her hand tightly. "Don't believe them, Frona. They are trying to," with a gulping swallow, "to kill me." "Why? Do be calm. Tell me." "Why, last night," he began hurriedly, but broke off to listen to the Scandinavian previously sworn, who was speaking with ponderous slowness. "I wake wide open quick," he was saying. "I come to the door. I there hear one shot more." He was interrupted by a warm complexioned man clad in faded mackinaws. "What did you think?" he asked. "Eh?" the witness queried, his face dark and troubled with perplexity. "When you came to the door, what was your first thought?" "Ah," the man sighed, his face clearing, and infinite comprehension sounding in his voice. "I have no moccasins. I tink pretty damn cold." His satisfied expression changed to naive surprise when an outburst of laughter greeted his statement. But he went on stolidly. "One more shot I hear, and I run down the trail." Then Corliss pressed in through the crowd to Frona, and she lost what the man was saying. "What's up?" the engineer was asking. "Anything serious? Can I be of any use?" "Yes, yes." She caught his hand gratefully. "Get over the back channel somehow and tell my father to come. Tell him that Gregory St. Vincent is in trouble, that he is charged with—" "What are you charged with, Gregory?" she asked, turning to him. "Murder." "Murder?" from Corliss. "Yes, yes. Say that he is charged with murder, that I am here and that I need him. And tell him to bring me some clothes. And, Vance," with a pressure of the hand and swift upward look, "don't take any big chances, but do try to make it." "Oh, I'll make it all right." He tossed his head confidently and proceeded to elbow his way towards the door. "Who is helping you in your defense?" she asked St. Vincent. He shook his head. "No. They wanted to appoint someone, a renegade lawyer from the States, Bill Brown, but I declined him. He's taken the other side now. It's lynch law, you know, and their minds are made up. They're bound to get me." "I wish there were time to hear your side." "But, Frona, I am innocent. Shh!" She laid her hand on his arm to hush him and turned her attention to the witness. "So the newspaper feller, he fight like anything, but Pierre and me, we pull him into the shack. He cry and stand in one place." "Who cried?" interrupted the prosecuting lawyer. That feller there," the Scandinavian pointed directly at St. Vincent. "And I make a light. The slush lamp I find spilt over most everything, but I have a candle in my pocket. It is good practice to carry a candle in the pocket," he affirmed gravely. "And Borg, he lay on the floor dead, and the squaw say he did it, and then she die too." "Say who did it?" And his accusing finger singled out St. Vincent. "That feller there." "Did she?" Frona whispered. "Yes," St. Vincent whispered back. "She did, but I cannot imagine what prompted her. She must have been out of her head." The warm-faced man in the faded mackinaws then put the witness through a searching examination which Frona followed closely, but which elicited little new. "You have the right to cross-examine the witness," the chairman informed St. Vincent. Any questions you want to ask?" The correspondent shook his head. "Go on," Frona urged. "What's the use?" he asked, hopelessly. "I'm foredoomed. The verdict was reached before the trial began." "One moment, please." Frona's sharp command arrested the retiring witness. "You do not know of your own knowledge who committed this murder?" The Scandinavian gazed at her with a bovine expression on his leaden features, as though waiting for her question to percolate to his understanding. "You did not see who did it?" she asked again. Yes, that feller there," accusative finger to the fore. "She say he did." There was a general smile at this. "But you did not see it?" "I hear some shooting." "But you did not see who did the shooting?" No, but she said—" "That will do, thank you," she said sweetly, and the man retired. The prosecution consulted its notes. "Pierre La Flitche," was called out. A slender, swart-skinned man, lithe of figure and graceful, stepped forward to the open space before the table. He was darkly handsome, with a quick, eloquent eye which roved frankly everywhere. It rested for a moment on Frona, open and honest in its admiration, and she smiled and half nodded, for she liked him at first glance, and it seemed as though they had met of old time. He smiled pleasantly back, the smooth upper lip curling brightly and showing beautiful teeth, immaculately white. In answer to the stereotyped preliminaries, he stated that his name was that of his fathers, a descendant of the coureurs de bois. His mother, with a shrug of the shoulders and a flash of teeth, was a breed. He was born somewhere in the Barrens, on a hunting trip, he did not know where. Oui, men call him an old-timer. He had come into the country in the days of Jack McQuestion, across the Rockies from the Great Slave. On being told to go ahead with what he knew of the matter at hand, he deliberated a moment, as though casting about for the best departure. "In the spring it is good to sleep with the open door," he began, his words sounding clear and flute-like, and marked by haunting memories of the accents of his forebears put into the tongue. "And so I sleep last night, but I sleep like the cat. The fall of the leaf, the breath of the wind, and my ears whisper to me, whisper, whisper, all the night long. So the first shot," with a quick snap of the fingers, "and I am awake, just like that, and I am at the door." St. Vincent leaned toward Frona. "It was not the first shot." She nodded, with her eyes still bent on La Flitche, who gallantly waited. "Then 2 more shot," he went on. "Quick, together, boom, boom, just like that. Borg's shack, I say to myself, and run down the trail. I think Borg kill Bella, which was bad. Bella very fine girl," he confided with one of his irresistible smiles. "I like Bella, so I run, and John he run from his cabin like a fat cow with great noise. 'What the matter?' he say, and I say, 'I don't know.' And then something come, whew, out of the dark, just like that, and knock John down and knock me down. We grab everything all at once. It is a man. He is in undress. He fight. He cry, 'Oh, oh, oh,' just like that. We hold him tight. And by, pretty quick, he stop. Then we get up, and I say, 'Come along back.'" "Who was the man?" La Flitche turned partly and rested his eyes on St. Vincent. "Go on." "So, the man he will not go back, but John and I say yes, and he go." "Did he say anything?" "I ask him what the matter, but he cry, he sob, 'Hush, tush, hush, tush,' just like that." "Did you see anything particular about him?" La Flitche's brows drew up interrogatively. "Anything uncommon, out of the ordinary?"
Oui, blood on the hands."
Disregarding the murmur in the room, he went on, his facile play of features and gesture giving dramatic value to the recital.
"John make a light and Bella groan, like the hair seal when you shoot him in the body. Just like that when you shoot him in the body, under the flipper. And Borg lay over in the corner. I look, he no breathe tall. Then Bella open her eyes, and I look in her eyes, and I know she know me, La Flitche. 'Who did it, Bella?' I ask. And she roll her head on the floor and whisper, so low, so slow, 'Him dead?' I know she mean Borg, and I say yes. Then she lift up on one elbow, and look about, quick, in big hurry. And when she see St. Vincent, she look no more, only she look at Vincent all the time. Then she point at him, just like that." Suiting the action to the word, La Flitche turned and thrust a wavering finger at the prisoner. "And she say, 'Him, him, him.' And I say, 'Bella, who did it?' And she say, 'Him, him, him. St. Vincha, him do it.' And then
La Flitche's head fell limply forward on his chest and came back naturally erect as he finished, with a flash of teeth.
dead.
The warm-faced man, Bill Brown, put the quarter breed through the customary direct examination, which served to strengthen his testimony and to bring out the fact that a terrible struggle must have taken place in the killing of Borg. The heavy table was smashed, the stool and the bunk board splintered, and the stove overthrown.
Never did I see anything like it, La Flitche concluded his description of the wreck. No, never.
Brown turned him over to Frona with a bow, which a smile of hers paid for in full. She did not deem it unwise to cultivate cordiality with the lawyer. What she was working for was time. Time for her father to come. Time to be closeted with St. Vincent and learn all the details of what really had occurred. So she put questions, interminable questions to La Flitche. Twice only did anything of moment crop up.
You spoke of the first shot, Mr. La Flitche. Now, the walls of a log cabin are quite thick. Had your door been closed, do you think you could have heard that first shot?
He shook his head, though his dark eyes told her he divined the point she was endeavoring to establish.
And had the door of Borg's cabin been closed, would you have heard?
Again he shook his head.
Then, Mr. La Flitche, when you say the first shot, you do not mean necessarily the first shot fired, but rather the first shot you heard fired.
He nodded, and though she had scored her point, she could not see that it had any material bearing after all. Again she worked up craftily to another and stronger climax, though she felt all the time that La Flitche fathomed her.
You say it was very dark, Mr. La Flitche? Ah, oui, quite dark. How dark? How did you know it was John you met? John make much noise when he run. I know that kind of noise. Could you see him so as to know that it was he? Ah, no. Then, Mr. La Flitche, she demanded triumphantly, will you please state how you knew there was blood on the hands of Mr. St. Vincent?
His lip lifted in a dazzling smile, and he paused a moment.
How? I feel it warm on his hands, and my nose. Ah, the smoke of the hunter camp, long way off, the hole where the rabbit hide, the track of the moose which has gone before, does not my nose tell me?
He flung his head back, and then with tense face, eyes closed, nostrils quivering and dilated, he simulated the quiescence of all the senses save one, and the concentration of his whole being on that one. Then his eyes fluttered partly open, and he regarded her dreamily. I smell the blood on his hands, the warm blood, the hot blood on his hands.
And by gad, he can do it,
some man exclaimed. And so convinced was Frona that she glanced involuntarily at St. Vincent's hands, and saw there the rusty brown stains on the cuffs of his flannel shirt. As La Flitche left the stand, Bill Brown came over to her and shook hands. No more than proper I should know the lawyer for the defence, he said good-naturedly, running over his notes for the next witness.
But don't you think it is rather unfair to me? She asked brightly. I have not had time to prepare my case. I know nothing about it except what I have gleaned from your two witnesses. Don't you think, Mr. Brown, her voice rippling along in persuasive little notes, don't you think it would be advisable to adjourn the meeting until to-morrow?
He deliberated, looking at his watch. Wouldn't be a bad idea. It's 5 o'clock anyway, and the men ought to be cooking their suppers. She thanked him, as some women can, without speech. Yet, as he looked down into her face and eyes, he experienced a subtler and greater satisfaction than if she had spoken. He stepped to his old position and addressed the room. On consultation of the defence and the prosecution, and upon consideration of the lateness of the hour and the impossibility of finishing the trial within a reasonable limit, I take the liberty of moving an adjournment until 8 o'clock to-morrow morning. The ayes have it, the chairman proclaimed, coming down from his place and proceeding to build the fire, for he was a part owner of the cabin and cook for his crowd. End of chapter 26, read by Don W. Jenkins, Rancho San Diego, California, shaggybark.blogspot.com. Chapter 27 of A Daughter of the Snows by Jack London. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 27. Frona turned to St. Vincent as the last of the crowd filed out. He clutched her hands spasmodically like a drowning man.
Do believe me, Frona. Promise me.
Her face flushed.
You are excited, she said, or you would not say such things. Not that I blame you," she relented. "I hardly imagine the situation can be anything else but exciting." "Yes, and well I know it," he answered bitterly. "I am acting like a fool, and I can't help it. The strain has been terrible, and as though the horror of Borg's end were not enough, to be considered the murderer and haled up for mob justice. Forgive me, Frona, I am beside myself. Of course, I know that you will believe me." "Then tell me, Gregory." "In the first place, the woman, Bella, lied. She must have been crazed to make that dying statement when I fought as I did for her and Borg. That is the only explanation." "Begin at the beginning," she interrupted. "Remember, I know nothing."
He settled himself more comfortably on the stool and rolled a cigarette as he took up the history of the previous night.
"It must have been about 1 a.m. when I was awakened by the lighting of the slush lamp. I thought it was Borg, wondering what he was prowling about for, and was on the verge of dropping off to sleep when, though I do not know what prompted me, I opened my eyes. 2 strange men were in the cabin. Both wore masks and fur caps with the flaps pulled down, so that I could see nothing of their faces save the glistening of the eyes through the eye slits. I had no first thought, unless it was that danger threatened. I lay quietly for a second and deliberated. Borg had borrowed my pistol, and I was actually unarmed. My rifle was by the door. I decided to make a rush for it, but no sooner had I struck the floor than one of the men turned on me, at the same time firing his revolver. That was the first shot, and the one La Flitche did not hear. It was in the struggle afterwards that the door was burst open, which enabled him to hear the last 3. Well, I was so close to the man, and my leap out of the bed was so unexpected, that he missed me. The next moment we grappled and rolled on the floor. Of course, Borg was aroused, and the second man turned his attention to him and Bella. It was this second man who did the killing, for my man naturally had his hands full. You heard the testimony. From the way the cabin was wrecked, you can picture the struggle. We rolled and tossed about and fought till stools, table, and shelves, everything was smashed. Oh, Frona, it was terrible. Borg fighting for his life, Bella helping him, though wounded and groaning, and I unable to aid. But finally, in a very short while, I began to conquer the man with whom I was struggling. I had got him down on his back, pinioned his arms with my knees, and was slowly throttling him, when the other man finished the work and turned on me also. What could I do? 2 to 1, and winded, so I was thrown into the corner, and they made their escape. I confess that I must have been badly rattled by that time, for as soon as I caught my breath, I took out after them, and without a weapon. Then I collided with La Flitche and John, and you know the rest. Only," he knit his brows in puzzlement, "only I cannot understand why Bella should accuse me."
He looked at her appealingly, and, though she pressed his hand sympathetically, she remained silent, weighing pro and con what she had heard. She shook her head slowly.
"It's a bad case, and the thing is to convince them. But my God, Frona, I am innocent. I have not been a saint, perhaps, but my hands are clean from blood." "But remember, Gregory," she said gently, "I am not to judge you. Unhappily, it rests with the men of this miners' meeting, and the problem is, how are they to be convinced of your innocence? The 2 main points are against you. Bella's dying words and the blood on your sleeve." "The place was areek with blood," St. Vincent cried passionately, springing to his feet. "I tell you, it was areek. How could I avoid floundering in it, fighting as I was for my life? Can you not take my word?" "There, there, Gregory. Sit down. You are truly beside yourself. If your case rested with me, you know you would go free and clean. But these men, you know what mob rule is. How are we to persuade them to let you go? Don't you see? You have no witnesses. A dying woman's words are more sacred than a living man's. Can you show cause for the woman to die with a lie on her lips? Had she any reason to hate you? Had you done her or her husband an injury?"
He shook his head.
"Certainly, to us, the thing is inexplicable. But the miners need no explanation. To them, it is obvious. It rests with us to disprove the obvious. Can we do it?"
The correspondent sank down despondently, with a collapsing of the chest and a drooping forward of the shoulders.
"Then I am indeed lost." "No, it's not so bad as that. You shall not be hanged. Trust me for that."
"But what can you do?" he asked despairingly. "They have usurped the law, have made themselves the law."
"In the first place, the river has broken. That means everything. The governor and the territorial judges may be expected in at any moment with a detachment of police at their backs, and they're certain to stop here. And furthermore, We may be able to do something ourselves. The river is open, and if it comes to the worst, escape would be another way out, and escape is the last thing they would dream of." No, impossible. What are you and I against the many?" "But there's my father and Baron Courbertin. 4 determined people, acting together, may perform miracles, Gregory dear. Trust me, it shall come out well." She kissed him and ran her hand through his hair, but the worried look did not depart. Jacob Welse crossed over the back channel long before dark, and with him came Dell, the Baron, and Corliss. While Frona retired to change her clothes in one of the smaller cabins which the masculine owners readily turned over to her, her father saw to the welfare of the mail carrier. The dispatches were of serious import, so serious that long after Jacob Welse had read and reread them his face was dark and clouded. But he put the anxiety from him when he returned to Frona. St. Vincent, who was confined in an adjoining cabin, was permitted to see them. "It looks bad," Jacob Welse said, on parting for the night. "But rest assured, St. Vincent, bad or not, you'll not be stretched up so long as I've a hand to play in the rumpus. I am certain you did not kill Borg, and there's my fist on it." "A long day," Corliss remarked as he walked back with Frona to her cabin. "And a longer to-morrow," she answered wearily, "and I'm so sleepy." "You're a brave little woman, and I'm proud of you." It was 10 o'clock, and she looked out through the dim twilight to the ghostly ice drifting steadily by. "And in this trouble," he went on, "depend on me in any way." "In any way?" she queried, with a catch in her voice. "If I were a hero of the melodrama, I'd say, 'to the death,' but as I'm not, I'll just repeat, 'in any way.'" "You are good to me, Vance. I can never repay." "Tut, tut, I do not put myself on sale. Love is service, I believe." She looked at him for a long time, but while her face betrayed soft wonder, at heart she was troubled, she knew not why, and the events of the day, and of all the days since she had known him, came fluttering through her mind. "Do you believe in a white friendship?" she asked at last. "For I do hope that such a bond may hold us always, a bright white friendship, a comradeship, as it were." And as she asked, she was aware that the phrase did not quite express what she felt and would desire. And when he shook his head, she experienced a glad little inexplicable thrill. "A comradeship?" he questioned. "When you know I love you?" "Yes," she affirmed in a low voice. "I am afraid, after all, that your knowledge of man is very limited. Believe me, we are not made of such clay. A comradeship? A coming in out of the cold to sit by your fire? Good. But a coming in when another man sits with you by your fire? No. Comradeship would demand that I delight in your delights, and yet do you think for a moment that I could see you with another man's child in your arms, a child which might have been mine, with that other man looking out at me through the child's eyes, laughing at me through his mouth? I say, do you think I could delight in your delights? No, no, love cannot shackle itself with white friendships." She put her hand on his arm. "Do you think I am wrong?" he asked, bewildered by the strange look in her face. She was sobbing quietly. "You are tired and overwrought. So there, good night. You must get to bed." "No, don't go, not yet." And she arrested him. No, I am foolish. As you say, I am tired. But listen, Vance. There is much to be done. We must plan to-morrow's work. Come inside. Father and Baron Courbertin are together, and if the worst comes, we 4 must do big things." "Spectacular," Jacob Welse commented when Frona had briefly outlined the course of action and assigned them their parts. "But its very unexpectedness ought to carry it through." "A coup d'etat," was the Baron's verdict. "Magnificent! Ah, I feel warm all over at the thought. Hands up, I cry, thus and very fierce." "And if they do not hold up their hands?" he appealed to Jacob Welse. "Then shoot. Never bluff when you're behind a gun, Courbertin. It's held by good authorities to be unhealthy." "And you are to take charge of La Bijou, Vance," Frona said. "Father thinks there will be little ice to-morrow, if it doesn't jam to-night. All you've to do is to have the canoe by the bank just before the door. Of course, you won't know what is happening until St. Vincent comes running. Then in with him, and away you go, Dawson. So I'll say good night and good-bye now, for I may not have the opportunity in the morning." "And keep the left-hand channel till you're past the bend," Jacob Welse counselled him. "Then take the cut-offs to the right and follow the swiftest water. Now off with you and into your blankets. It's 70 miles to Dawson, and you'll have to make it at one clip."
End of chapter 27, read by Don W. Jenkins, Rancho San Diego, California, shaggybark.blogspot.com. Chapter 28 of A Daughter of the Snows by Jack London. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 28. Jacob Welse was given due respect when he arose at the convening of the miners' meeting and denounced the proceedings. While such meetings had performed a legitimate function in the past, he contended, when there was no law in the land, that time was now beyond recall, for law was now established, and it was just law. The Queen's government had shown itself fit to cope with the situation, and for them to usurp its powers was to step backward into the night out of which they had come. Further, no lighter word than criminal could characterize such conduct. And yet further, he promised them in set, sober terms, if anything serious were the outcome, to take an active part in the prosecution of every one of them. At the conclusion of his speech, he made a motion to hold the prisoner for the territorial court and to adjourn, but was voted down without discussion.
"Don't you see?" St. Vincent said to Frona. "There is no hope." "But there is. Listen." And she swiftly outlined the plot of the night before. He followed her in a half-hearted way, too crushed to partake of her enthusiasm. "It's madness to attempt it," he objected when she had done. "And it looks very much like hanging not to attempt it," she answered a little spiritedly. "Surely you will make a fight?" "Surely," he replied hollowly. The first witnesses were two Swedes, who told of the wash-tub incident when Borg had given way to one of his fits of anger. Trivial as the incident was, in the light of subsequent events, it at once became serious. It opened the way for the imagination into a vast familiar field. It was not so much what was said as what was left unsaid. Men born of women, the rudest of them, knew life well enough to be aware of its significance. A vulgar, common happening, capable of but one interpretation. Heads were wagged knowingly in the course of the testimony, and whispered comments went the rounds. Half a dozen witnesses followed in rapid succession, all of whom had closely examined the scene of the crime and gone over the island carefully, and all of whom were agreed that there was not the slightest trace to be found of the two men mentioned by the prisoner in his preliminary statement. To Frona's surprise, Del Bishop went upon the stand. She knew he disliked St. Vincent, but could not imagine any evidence he could possess which would bear upon the case. Being sworn, and age and nationality ascertained, Bill Brown asked him his business. "Pocket miner," he challenged back, sweeping the assemblage with an aggressive glance. Now it happens that a very small class of men follow pocketing, and that a very large class of men, miners too, disbelieve utterly in any such method for obtaining gold. "Pocket miner?" sneered a red-shirted, patriarchal-looking man, a man who had washed his first pan in the California diggings in the early '50s. "Yep," Del affirmed. "Now look here, young feller," his interlocutor continued. "Do you mean to tell me you ever struck it in such fangled way?" "Yep." "Don't believe it," with a contemptuous shrug. Del swallowed fast and raised his head with a jerk. "Mr. Chairman, I rise to make a statement. I won't interfere with the dignity of the court, but I just wish to simply and distinctly state that after the meeting's over, I'm going to punch the head of every man that gets gay. Understand?" "You're out of order," the chairman replied, rapping the table with the caulking mallet. "And your head, too," Del cried, turning upon him. "Damn poor order you preserve. Pocketing's got nothing to do with this here trial, and why don't you shut such fool questions out? I'll take care of you afterwards, you pot-walloper." "You will you?" The chairman grew red in the face, dropped the mallet, and sprang to his feet. Del stepped forward to meet him, but Bill Brown sprang in between and held them apart. "Order, gentlemen, order," he begged. "This is no time for unseemly exhibitions. And remember, there are ladies present." The two men grunted and subsided, and Bill Brown asked, "Mr. Bishop, we understand that you are well acquainted with the prisoner. Will you please tell the court what you know of his general character?" Del broadened into a smile. "Well, in the first place, he's an extremely quarrelsome disposition." "Hold! I won't have it!" The prisoner was on his feet, trembling with anger. You shall not swear my life away in such fashion, to bring a madman, whom I have only met once in my life, to testify as to my character." The pocket miner turned to him. "So you don't know me, Gregory St. Vincent?" "No," St. Vincent replied coldly. "I do not know you, my man." "Don't you man me!" Del shouted hotly. But St. Vincent ignored him, turning to the crowd. "I never saw the fellow but once before, and then for a few brief moments in Dawson." "You'll remember before I'm done," Del sneered. "So hold your hush and let me say my little say. I came into the country with him way back in '84. St. Vincent regarded him with sudden interest. "Yep, Mr. Gregory St. Vincent, I see you begin to recollect. I sported whiskers and my name was Brown, Joe Brown in them days." He grinned vindictively, and the correspondent seemed to lose all interest. "Is it true, Gregory?" Frona whispered. "I begin to recognize," he muttered slowly. "I don't know. No. Folly. The man must have died." "You say in '84, Mr. Bishop?" Bill Brown prompted. "Yep, in '84. He was a newspaper man bound round the world by way of Alaska and Siberia. I'd run away from a whaler at Sitka, that squares it with Brown, and I engaged with him for 40 a month and found. Well, he quarreled with me." A snicker beginning from nowhere in particular, but passing on from man to man, swelling in volume, greeted this statement. Even Frona and Del himself were forced to smile, and the only sober face was the prisoner's. "But he quarreled with old Andy at D.A., and with Chief George of the Chilcoots, and the factor at Pelly, and so on down the line. He got us into no end of trouble, and specially woman trouble. He was always monkeying around." "Mr. Chairman, I object." Frona stood up, her face quite calm and blood under control. "There is no necessity for bringing in the amours of Mr. St. Vincent. They have no bearing whatsoever upon the case. And further, none of the men of this meeting are clean enough to be prompted by the right motive for conducting such an inquiry. So I demand that the prosecution at least confine itself to relevant testimony." Bill Brown came up, smugly complacent and smiling. "Mr. Chairman, we willingly accede to the request made by the defense. Whatever we have brought out has been relevant and material. Whatever we intend to bring out shall be relevant and material. Mr. Bishop is our star witness, and his testimony is to the point. It must be taken into consideration that we have no direct evidence as to the murder of John Borg. We can bring no eyewitnesses into the court. Whatever we have is circumstantial. It is incumbent upon us to show cause. To show cause, it is necessary to go to the character of the accused. This we intend to do. We intend to show his adulterous and lustful nature, which has culminated in a dastardly deed and jeopardized his neck. We intend to show that the truth is not in him, that he is a liar beyond price, that no word he may speak upon the stand need be accepted by a jury of his peers. We intend to show all this, and to weave it together thread by thread till we have a rope long enough and strong enough to hang him with before the day is done. So I respectfully submit, Mr. Chairman, that the witness be allowed to proceed." The chairman decided against Frona, and her appeal to the meeting was voted down. Bill Brown nodded to Del to resume. "As I was saying, he got us into no end of trouble. Now, I've been mixed up with water all my life. Never can get away from it, it seems. And the more I'm mixed, the less I know about it. St. Vincent knew this, too, and him a clever hand at the paddle. Yet he left me to run the box canyon alone while he walked around. Result? I was turned over, lost half the outfit and all the tobacco, and then he put the blame on me besides. Right after that, he got tangled up with the Lake Lebarge sticks, and both of us came near croaking." "And why was that?" Bill Brown interjected. "All along of a pretty squaw that looked too kindly at him. After we got clear, I lectured him on women in general and squaws in particular, and he promised to behave. Then we had a hot time with the little salmons. He was cuter this time, and I didn't know for keeps, but I guessed. He said it was the medicine men who got horstal, but nothing will stir up a medicine man quicker'n women, and the facts pointed that way. When I talked it over with him in a fatherly way, he got wrathy, and I had to take him out in the bank and give him a threshing. Then he got sulky and didn't brighten up till we ran into the mouth of the Reindeer River, where a camp of Siwashes were fishing salmon. But he had it in for me all the time, only I didn't know it. Was ready at any time to give me the double cross. Now, there's no denying he's got a taking away with women. All he has to do is whistle 'em up like dogs. Most remarkable faculty, that. There was the wickedest, prettiest squaw among the reindeers. Never saw her beat except Bella. Well, I guess he whistled her up, for he delayed in the camp longer than was necessary, being partial to women," interrupted the chairman, who, from profitless watching of Frona's immobile face, had turned to her hand, the nervous twitching and clinching of which revealed what her face had hidden. "That will do, Mr. Bishop. I think we've had enough of squaws."
"Pray do not temper the testimony," Frona chirruped sweetly. "It seems very important."
"Do you know what I am going to say next?" Del demanded hotly of the chairman. "You don't, eh? Then shut up. I'm running this particular sideshow."
Bill Brown sprang in to avert hostilities, but the chairman restrained himself, and Bishop went on.
"I'd been done with the whole shooting match, squaws and all, if you hadn't broke me off. Well, as I said, he had it in for me, and the first thing I didn't know, he'd hit me on the head with the rifle stock, bundled the squaw into the canoe, and pulled out. You all know what the Yukon country was in '84, and there I was without an outfit, left alone 1,000 miles from anywhere. I got out all right, though. There's no need telling how, and so did he. You've all heard of his adventures in Siberia. Well," with an impressive pause, "I happen to know a thing or two myself."
He shoved a hand into the big pocket of his Mackinaw jacket and pulled out a dingy, leather-bound volume of venerable appearance.
"I got this from Pete Whipple's old woman, Whipple of El Dorado. It concerns her granduncle or great-granduncle, I don't know which. And if there's anybody here can read Russian, why, it'll go into the details of that Siberian trip. But as there's no one here that can..."
"Courbertin, he can read it," someone called in the crowd.
A way was made for the Frenchman forthwith, and he was pushed and shoved protestingly to the front.
"Savvy the lingo?" Del demanded.
"Yes, but so poorly, so miserable," Courbertin demurred. "It is a long time. I forget."
"Go ahead. We won't criticize."
"No, but..."
"Go ahead," the chairman commanded. Del thrust the book into his hands, opened at the yellow title page.
"I've been itching to get my paws on some buck like you for months and months," he assured him gleefully. "And now I've got you, you can't shake me, Charlie, so fire away."
Courbertin began hesitatingly.
"The Journal of Father Yakonst, comprising an account in brief of his life in the Benedictine monastery at Obidorsky, and in full of his marvelous adventures in East Siberia among the deer men."
The baron looked up for instructions.
"Tell us when it was printed," Del ordered him.
"In Warsaw, 1807.
The pocket miner turned triumphantly to the room.
"Do you hear that? Just keep track of it. 1807, remember?"
The baron took up the opening paragraph.
"It was because of Tamerlane,"
he commenced, unconsciously putting his translation into a construction with which he was already familiar. At his first words, Frona turned white, and she remained white throughout the reading. Once she stole a glance at her father, and was glad that he was looking straight before him, for she did not feel able to meet his gaze just then. On the other hand, though she knew St. Vincent was eyeing her narrowly, she took no notice of him, and all he could see was a white face devoid of expression.
"When Tamerlane swept with fire and sword over Eastern Asia," Courbertin read slowly, "states were disrupted, cities overthrown, and tribes scattered like stardust. A vast people was hurled broadcast over the land, fleeing before the conquerors. Before the mad lust of the conquerors. These refugees swung far into Siberia, circling to the north and east, and fringing the rim of the polar basin with a spray of Mongol tribes."
"Skip a few pages," Bill Brown advised, "and read here and there. We haven't got all night."
Courbertin complied.
"The coast people are Eskimo stock, merry of nature and not offensive. They call themselves the Ukilion, or the Seamen. From them I bought dogs and food. But they are subject to the Chow Chuen, who live in the interior and are known as the Deer Men. The Chow Chuen are a fierce and savage race. When I left the coast, they fell upon me, took from me my goods, and made me a slave."
He ran over a few pages.
"I worked my way to a seat among the headmen, but I was no nearer my freedom. My wisdom was of too great value to them for me to depart. Old Piuni was a great chief, and it was decreed that I should marry his daughter Ilswunga. Ilswunga was a filthy creature. She would not bathe, and her ways were not good. I did marry Ilswunga, but she was a wife to me only in name. Then did she complain to her father, the old Piuni, and he was very wroth, and dissension was sown among the tribes. But in the end I became mightier than ever. What of my cunning and resource,
and Ilswunga made no more complaint, for I taught her games with cards, which she might play by herself, and other things." "Is that enough?" Courbertin asked. "Yes, that will do," Bill Brown answered. "But one moment. Please state again the date of publication." 1807, in Warsaw." "Hold on, Baron," Del Bishop spoke up. "Now that you're on the stand, I've got a question or so to slap into you." He turned to the courtroom. "Gentlemen, you've all heard somewhat of the prisoner's experiences in Siberia. You've caught on to the remarkable sameness between them and those published by Father Yakonsk nearly 100 years ago, and you have concluded that there's been some wholesale cribbing somewhere. I propose to show you that it's more than cribbing. The prisoner gave me the shake on the Reindeer River in '88. Fall of '88 he was at St. Michael's on his way to Siberia. '89 and '90 he was, by his talk, cutting up antics in Siberia. '91 he came back to the world, working the conquering hero graft in Frisco. Now let's see if the Frenchman can make us wise." "You were in Japan?" he asked. Courbertin, who had followed the dates, made a quick calculation and could but illy conceal his surprise. He looked appealingly to Frona, but she did not help him. "Yes," he said finally. "And you met the prisoner there?" "Yes." "What year was it?" There was a general craning forward to catch the answer. 1889, and it came unwillingly. "Now how can that be, Baron?" Del asked in a wheedling tone. "The prisoner was in Siberia at that time." Courbertin shrugged his shoulders that it was no concern of his, and came off the stand. An impromptu recess was taken by the court room for several minutes, wherein there was much whispering and shaking of heads. "That's all a lie." St. Vincent leaned close to Frona's ear, but she did not hear. "Appearances are against me, but I can explain it all." But she did not move a muscle, and he was called to the stand by the chairman. She turned to her father, and the tears rushed up into her eyes when he rested his hand on hers. "Do you care to pull out?" he asked after a momentary hesitation. She shook her head, and St. Vincent began to speak. It was the same story he had told her, though told now a little more fully, and in no wise did it conflict with the evidence of La Flitche and John. He acknowledged the wash-tub incident, caused, he explained, by an act of simple courtesy on his part and by John Borg's unreasoning answer. He acknowledged that Bella had been killed by his own pistol, but stated that the pistol had been borrowed by Borg several days previously and not returned. Concerning Bella's accusation, he could say nothing. He could not see why she should die with a lie on her lips. He had never in the slightest way incurred her displeasure, so even revenge could not be advanced. It was inexplicable. As for the testimony of Bishop, he did not care to discuss it. It was a tissue of falsehood, cunningly interwoven with truth. It was true the man had gone into Alaska with him in 1888, but his version of the things which happened there was maliciously untrue. Regarding the Baron, there was a slight mistake in the dates. That was all. In questioning him, Bill Brown brought out one little surprise. From the prisoner's story, he had made a hard fight against the two mysterious men. "If," Brown asked, "such were the case, how can you explain away the fact that you came out of the struggle unmarked? On examination of the body of John Borg, many bruises and contusions were noticeable. How is it, if you put up such a stiff fight, that you escaped being battered?" St. Vincent did not know, though he confessed to feeling stiff and sore all over. It did not matter anyway. He had killed neither Borg nor his wife. That much he did know. Frona prefaced her argument to the meeting with a pithy discourse on the sacredness of human life, the weaknesses and dangers of circumstantial evidence, and the rights of the accused wherever doubt arose. Then she plunged into the evidence, stripping off the superfluous and striving to confine herself to facts. In the first place, she denied that a motive for the deed had been shown. As it was, the introduction of such evidence was an insult to their intelligence, and she had sufficient faith in their manhood and perspicacity to know that such puerility would not sway them in the verdict they were to give. And on the other hand, in dealing with the particular points at issue, she denied that any intimacy had been shown to have existed between Bella and St. Vincent, and she denied further that it had been shown that any intimacy had been attempted on the part of St. Vincent.
Viewed honestly, the washtub incident, the only evidence brought forward, was a laughable little affair portraying how the simple courtesy of a gentleman might be misunderstood by a mad boor of a husband. She left it to their common sense. They were not fools. They had striven to prove the prisoner bad-tempered. She did not need to prove anything of the sort concerning John Borg. They all knew his terrible fits of temper. They all knew that his temper was proverbial in the community, that it had prevented him from having friends and had made him many enemies. Was it not very probable, therefore, that the masked men were two such enemies? As to what particular motive actuated these two men, she could not say, but it rested with them, the judges, to know whether in all Alaska there were or were not two men whom John Borg could have given cause sufficient for them to take his life. Witness had testified that no traces had been found of these two men. But the witness had not testified that no traces had been found of St. Vincent, Pierre Lafitte, or John the Swede. And there was no need for them to so testify. Everybody knew that no footmarks were left when St. Vincent ran up the trail, and when he came back with Lafitte and the other man. Everybody knew the condition of the trail, that it was a hard-packed groove in the ground, on which a soft moccasin could leave no impression, and that had the ice not gone down the river, no traces would have been left by the murderers in passing Frona to the mainland. At this juncture Lafitte nodded his head in approbation, and she went on. Capital had been made of the blood on St. Vincent's hands. If they chose to examine the moccasins at that moment on the feet of Mr. Lafitte, they would also find blood. That did not argue that Mr. Lafitte had been a party to the shedding of the blood. Mr. Brown had drawn attention to the fact that the prisoner had not been bruised or marked in the savage encounter which had taken place. She thanked him for having done so. John Borg's body showed that it had been roughly used. He was a larger, stronger, heavier man than St. Vincent. If, as charged, St. Vincent had committed the murder, and necessarily therefore engaged in a struggle severe enough to bruise John Borg, how was it that he had come out unharmed? That was a point worthy of consideration. Another one was, why did he run down the trail? It was inconceivable, if he had committed the murder, that he should, without dressing or preparation for escape, run towards the other cabins. It was, however, easily conceivable that he should take up the pursuit of the real murderers, and in the darkness, exhausted, breathless, and certainly somewhat excited, run blindly down the trail. Her summing up was a strong piece of synthesis, and when she had done, the meeting applauded her roundly. But she was angry and hurt, for she knew the demonstration was for her sex rather than for her cause and the work she had done. Bill Brown, somewhat of a shyster, and his ear ever cocked to the crowd, was not above taking advantage when opportunity offered, and when it did not offer, to dogmatize artfully. In this his native humor was a strong factor, and when he had finished with the mysterious masked men, they were as exploded sun myths, which phrase he promptly applied to them. They could not have got off the island. The condition of the ice for the 3 or 4 hours preceding the break-up would not have permitted it. The prisoner had implicated none of the residents of the island, while every one of them, with the exception of the prisoner, had been accounted for elsewhere. Possibly the prisoner was excited when he ran down the trail into the arms of Lafitte and John the Swede. One should have thought, however, that he had grown used to such things in Siberia. But that was immaterial. The facts were that he was undoubtedly in an abnormal state of excitement, that he was hysterically excited, and that a murderer under such circumstances would take little account of where he ran. Such things had happened before. Many a man had butted into his own retribution. In the matter of the relations of Borg, Bella, and St. Vincent, he made a strong appeal to the instinctive prejudices of his listeners, and for the time being abandoned matter-of-fact reasoning for all potent sentimental platitudes. He granted that circumstantial evidence never proved anything absolutely. It was not necessary it should. Beyond the shadow of a reasonable doubt was all that was required. That this had been done, he went on to review the testimony. "And finally," he said, "you can't get around Bella's last words. We know nothing of our own direct knowledge. We've been feeling around in the dark, clutching at little things and trying to figure it all out. But, gentlemen," he paused to search the faces of his listeners, "Bella knew the truth. Hers is no circumstantial evidence. With quick, anguished breath and life blood ebbing from her and eyeballs glazing, she spoke the truth.
With dark night coming on and the death rattle in her throat, she raised herself weakly and pointed a shaking finger at the accused, thus, and she said, "Him, him, him! St. Vincia, him do it!" With Bill Brown's finger still boring into him, St. Vincent struggled to his feet. His face looked old and gray, and he looked about him speechlessly. "Funk, funk," was whispered back and forth, and not so softly but what he heard. He moistened his lips repeatedly, and his tongue fought for articulation. "It is as I have said," he succeeded finally. "I did not do it. Before God, I did not do it." He stared fixedly at John the Swede, waiting the while on his laggard thought. I did not do it. I did not. I did not." He seemed to have become lost in some supreme meditation, wherein John the Swede figured largely, and as Frona caught him by the hand and pulled him gently down, some man cried out, "Secret ballot!" But Bill Brown was on his feet at once. "No, I say no, an open ballot. We are men, and as men are not afraid to put ourselves on record." A chorus of approval greeted him, and the open ballot began. Man after man, called upon by name, spoke the one word, "Guilty." Baron Courbertin came forward and whispered to Frona. She nodded her head and smiled, and he edged his way back, taking up a position by the door. He voted "Not guilty" when his turn came, as did Frona and Jacob Welse. Pierre La Flitche wavered a moment, looking keenly at Frona and St. Vincent, then spoke up, clear and flute-like, "Guilty." As the chairman arose, Jacob Welse casually walked over to the opposite side of the table and stood with his back to the stove. Courbertin, who had missed nothing, pulled a pickle keg out from the wall and stepped upon it. The chairman cleared his throat and rapped for order. "Gentlemen," he announced, "the prisoner." "Hands up!" Jacob Welse commanded peremptorily, and a fraction of a second after him came the shrill, "Hands up, gentlemen!" of Courbertin. Front and rear, they commanded the crowd with their revolvers. Every hand was in the air, the chairman's having gone up still grasping the mallet. There was no disturbance. Each stood or sat in the same posture as when the command went forth. Their eyes, playing here and there among the central figures, always returned to Jacob Welse. St. Vincent sat as one dumbfounded. Frona thrust a revolver into his hand, but his limp fingers refused to close on it. "Come, Gregory," she entreated. "Quick, Corliss is waiting with the canoe. Come!" She took him, and he managed to grip the weapon. Then she pulled and tugged, as when awakening a heavy sleeper, till he was on his feet. But his face was livid, his eyes like a somnambulist's, and he was afflicted as with a palsy. Still holding him, she took a step backward for him to come on. He ventured it with a shaking knee. There was no sound save the heavy breathing of many men. A man coughed slightly and cleared his throat. It was disquieting, and all eyes centered upon him rebukingly. The man became embarrassed and shifted his weight uneasily to the other leg. Then the heavy breathing settled down again. St. Vincent took another step, but his fingers relaxed and the revolver fell with a loud noise to the floor. He made no effort to recover it. Frona stooped hurriedly, but Pierre La Flitche had set his foot upon it. She looked up and saw his hands above his head and his eyes fixed absently on Jacob Welse. She pushed at his leg, and the muscles were tense and hard, giving the lie to the indifference in his face. St. Vincent looked down helplessly, as though he could not understand. But this delay drew the attention of Jacob Welse, and as he tried to make out the cause, the chairman found his chance. Without crooking, his right arm swept out and down, the heavy caulking mallet leaping from his hand. It spanned the short distance and smote Jacob Welse below the ear. His revolver went off as he fell, and John the Swede grunted and clapped a hand to his thigh. Simultaneous with this, the Baron was overcome. Del Bishop, with hands still above his head and eyes fixed innocently before him, had simply kicked the pickle keg out from under the Frenchman and brought him to the floor. His bullet, however, sped harmlessly through the roof. La Flitche seized Frona in his arms. St. Vincent, suddenly awakening, sprang for the door, but was tripped up by the breed's ready foot. The chairman pounded the table with his fist and concluded his broken sentence. "Gentlemen, the prisoner is found guilty as charged." End of chapter 28. Read by Don W. Jenkins, Rancho San Diego, California, shaggybark.blogspot.com. Chapter 29 of A Daughter of the Snows by Jack London. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 29. Frona had gone at once to her father's side, but he was already recovering. Courbertin was brought forward with a scratched face, sprained wrist, and an insubordinate tongue.
To prevent discussion and to save time, Bill Brown claimed the floor.
Mr. Chairman, while we condemn the attempt on the part of Jacob Welse, Frona Welse, and Baron Courbertin to rescue the prisoner and thwart justice, we cannot, under the circumstances, but sympathize with them. There is no need that I should go further into this matter. You all know, and doubtless, under a like situation, would have done the same. And so, in order that we may expeditiously finish the business, I make a motion to disarm the 3 prisoners and let them go. The motion was carried, and the 2 men searched for weapons. Frona was saved this by giving her word that she was no longer armed. The meeting then resolved itself into a hanging committee and began to file out of the cabin. "Sorry I had to do it," the chairman said, half apologetically, half defiantly. Jacob Welse smiled. "You took your chance," he answered, "and I can't blame you. I only wish I'd got you, though." Excited voices arose from across the cabin. "Here, you! Leggo! Step on his fingers, Tim! Break that grip! Ouch! Ow! Pry his mouth open!" Frona saw a knot of struggling men about St. Vincent and ran over. He had thrown himself down on the floor, and tooth and nail was fighting like a madman. Tim Duggan, a stalwart Celt, had come to close quarters with him, and St. Vincent's teeth were sunk into the man's arm. "Smash him, Tim! Smash him!" "How can I, ye fool? Get a pry on his mouth, will ye?"
"One moment, please."
The men made way for her, drawing back and leaving St. Vincent and Tim. Frona knelt down by him.
"Leave go, Gregory. Do leave go."
He looked up at her, and his eyes did not seem human. He breathed stertorously, and in his throat were queer little gasping noises of one overwrought.
"It is I, Gregory."
She brushed her hand soothingly across his brow.
"Don't you understand? It is I, Frona. Do leave go."
His whole body slowly relaxed, and a peaceful expression grew upon his face. His jaw dropped, and the man's arm was withdrawn.
"Now listen, Gregory. Though you are to die—"
"But I cannot, he groaned. "You said that I could trust to you, that all would come well." She thought of the chance which had been given, but said nothing. "Oh, Frona, Frona!" he sobbed, and buried his face in her lap.
"At least you can be a man. It is all that remains."
"Come on," Tim Duggan commanded. "Sorry to bother you, miss, but we've got to fetch 'em along. Drag 'em out, you fellies. Catch 'em by the legs, Blackie, and you too, Johnson."
St. Vincent's body stiffened at the words. The rational gleam went out of his eyes, and his fingers closed spasmodically on Frona's. She looked entreaty at the men, and they hesitated.
"Give me a minute with him," she begged. "Just a minute."
"He ain't worth it," Duggan sneered after they had drawn apart. "Look at 'em."
"It's a damn shame," corroborated Blackie, squinting sideways at Frona, whispering in St. Vincent's ear, the while her hand wandered caressingly through his hair. What she said they did not hear, but she got him on his feet and led him forward. He walked as a dead man might walk, and when he entered the open air, gazed forth wonderingly upon the muddy sweep of the Yukon. The crowd had formed by the bank, about a pine tree. A boy, engaged in running a rope over one of the branches, finished his task and slid down the trunk to the ground. He looked quickly at the palms of his hands and blew upon them, and a laugh went up. A couple of wolf dogs on the outskirts bristled up to each other and bared their fangs. Men encouraged them. They closed in and rolled over, but were kicked aside to make room for St. Vincent. Corliss came up the bank to Frona. "What's up?" he whispered. "Is it off?" She tried to speak, but swallowed and nodded her head.
"This way, Gregory."
She touched his arm and guided him to the box beneath the rope. Corliss, keeping step with them, looked over the crowd speculatively and felt into his jacket pocket. "Can I do anything?" he asked, gnawing his underlip impatiently. "Whatever you say goes, Frona. I can stand them off." She looked at him, aware of pleasure in the sight. She knew he would dare it, but she knew also that it would be unfair. St. Vincent had had his chance, and it was not right that further sacrifice should be made.
"No, Vance, it is too late. Nothing can be done."
"At least let me try," he persisted.
"No, it is not our fault that our plan failed, and," her eyes filled. "Please do not ask it of me."
"Then let me take you away. You cannot remain here."
"I must,"
she answered simply, and turned to St. Vincent, who seemed dreaming. Blackie was tying the hangman's knot in the rope's end, preparatory to slipping the noose over St. Vincent's head.
"Kiss me, Gregory," she said, her hand on his arm.
He started at the touch, and saw all eager eyes centered upon him and the yellow noose, just shaped, in the hands of the hangman. He threw up his arms as though to ward it off, and cried loudly,
"No, no! Let me confess! Let me tell the truth! Then you'll believe me!"
Bill Brown and the chairman shoved Blackie back, and the crowd gathered in. Cries and protestations rose from its midst.
"No, you don't!"
A boy's shrill voice made itself heard.
"I'm not going to go. I climbed the tree and made the rope fast, and I've got a right to stay."
"You're only a kid," replied a man's voice, "and it ain't good for you."
"I don't care, and I'm not a kid. I'm used to such things, and anyway, I climbed the tree. Look at my hands."
"Of course he can stay." Other voices took up the trouble. "Leave him alone, Curly." "You ain't the whole thing." A laugh greeted this, and things quieted down. "Silent!" the chairman called, and then to St. Vincent. "Go ahead, you, and don't take all day about it."
"Give us a chance to hear," the crowd broke out again.
"Put 'em on the box! Put 'em on the box!" St. Vincent was helped up and began with eager volubility.
"I didn't do it, but I saw it done. There weren't two men, only one. He did it, and Bella helped him."
A wave of laughter drowned him out.
"Not so fast," Bill Brown cautioned him. "Kindly explain how Bella helped this man kill herself. Begin at the beginning."
"That night, before he turned in, Borg set his burglar alarm."
"Burglar alarm?"
"That's what I called it. A tin bread pan attached to the latch so the door couldn't open without tumbling it down. He set it every night as though he were afraid of what might happen. The very thing which did happen, for that matter. On the night of the murder, I awoke with the feeling that someone was moving around. The slush lamp was burning low, and I saw Bella at the door. Borg was snoring. I could hear him plainly. Bella was taking down the bread pan, and she exercised great care about it. Then she opened the door, and an Indian came in softly. He had no mask, and I should know him if ever I see him again, for a scar ran along the forehead and down over one eye."
"I suppose you sprang out of bed and gave the alarm?"
"No, I didn't," St. Vincent answered with a defiant toss of the head, as though he might as well get the worst over with. "I just lay there and waited."
"What did you think?"
"That Bella was in collusion with the Indian, and that Borg was to be murdered. It came to me at once."
"And you did nothing?"
"Nothing."
His voice sank, and his eyes dropped to Frona, leaning against the box beneath him and steadying it. She did not seem to be affected.
"Bella came over to me, but I closed my eyes and breathed regularly. She held the slush lamp to me, but I played sleep naturally enough to fool her. Then I heard a snort of sudden awakening, an alarm, and a cry, and I looked out. The Indian was hacking at Borg with a knife, and Borg was warding off with his hands and trying to grapple him. When they did grapple, Bella crept up from behind and threw her arm in a stranglehold about her husband's neck. She put her knee into the small of his back and bent him backward, and with the Indian helping, threw him to the floor."
"And what did you do?"
"I watched."
"Had you a revolver?"
"Yes."
"The one you previously said John Borg had borrowed?"
"Yes, but I watched."
"Did John Borg call for help?"
"Yes."
"Can you give his words?"
"He called, 'St. Vincent! Oh, St. Vincent! Oh, my God! Oh, St. Vincent, help me!'" He shuddered at the recollection and added, "It was terrible."
"I should say so," Brown grunted. "And you?"
"I watched," was the dogged reply, while a groan went up from the crowd. "Borg shook clear of them, however, and got on his legs. He hurled Bella across the cabin with a back sweep of the arm and turned upon the Indian. Then they fought. The Indian had dropped the knife, and the sound of Borg's blows was sickening. I thought he would surely beat the Indian to death. That was when the furniture was smashed. They rolled and snarled and struggled like wild beasts. I wondered the Indian's chest did not cave in under some of Borg's blows. But Bella got the knife and stabbed her husband repeatedly about the body. The Indian had clinched with him, and his arms were not free, so he kicked out at her sideways. He must have broken her legs, for she cried out and fell down. And though she tried, she never stood up again. Then he went down, with the Indian under him, across the stove."
"Did he call any more for help?"
"He begged me to come to him."
"And?"
"I watched. He managed to get clear of the Indian and staggered over to me. He was streaming blood, and I could see he was very weak. 'Give me your gun,' he said. 'Quick, give me it.' He felt around blindly. Then his mind seemed to clear a bit, and he reached across me to the holster hanging on the wall and took the pistol. The Indian came at him with the knife again, but he did not try to defend himself. Instead, he went on towards Bella, with the Indian still hanging to him and hacking at him. The Indian seemed to bother and irritate him, and he shoved him away. He knelt down and turned Bella's face up to the light, but his own face was covered with blood, and he could not see. So he stopped long enough to brush the blood from his eyes. He appeared to look in order to make sure. Then he put the revolver to her breast and fired. The Indian went wild at this, and rushed at him with the knife, at the same time knocking the pistol out of his hand. It was then the shelf with the slush lamp was knocked down. They continued to fight in the darkness, and there were more shots fired, though I do not know by whom. I crawled out of the bunk, but they struck against me in their struggles, and I fell over Bella. That's when the blood got on my hands. As I ran out the door, more shots were fired. Then I met Laflitche and John, and you know the rest. This is the truth I have told you. I swear it." He looked down at Frona. She was steadying the box, and her face was composed. He looked out over the crowd and saw unbelief. Many were laughing. "Why did you not tell this story at first?" Bill Brown demanded. Because... "Well?" Because I might have helped."
There was more laughter at this, and Bill Brown turned away from him. "Gentlemen, you have heard this pipe dream. It is a wilder fairy story than his first. At the beginning of the trial, we promised to show that the truth was not in him. That we succeeded, your verdict is ample testimony. But that he should likewise succeed, and more brilliantly, we did not expect. That he has, you cannot doubt. What do you think of him? Lie upon lie he has given us. He has been proven a chronic liar. Are you to believe this last and fearfully impossible lie? Gentlemen, I can only ask that you reaffirm your judgment. And to those who may doubt his mendacity, surely there are but few, let me state that if his story is true, if he broke salt with this man, John Borg, and lay in his blankets while murder was done, if he did hear unmoved the voice of the man calling to him for help, if he did lie there and watch that carnival of butchery without his manhood prompting him, let me state, gentlemen, I say let me state that he is none the less deserveful of hanging. We cannot make a mistake. What shall it be?" "Death! String him up! Stretch him!" were the cries. But the crowd suddenly turned its attention to the river, and even Blackie refrained from his official task. A large raft, worked by a sweep at either end, was slipping past the tail of Split Up Island, close to the shore. When it was at their feet, its nose was slewed into the bank, and while its free end swung into the stream to make the consequent circle, a snubbing rope was flung ashore and several turns taken about the tree under which St. Vincent stood. A cargo of moose meat, red and raw, cut into quarters, peeped from beneath a cool covering of spruce browse. And because of this, the two men on the raft looked up to those on the bank with pride in their eyes. "Trying to make Dawson with it," one of them explained, "and the sun's all fired hot."
"Nope," said his comrade in reply to a query. "Don't care to stop and trade. It's worth $1.50 a pound down below, and we're hustling to get there. But we've got some pieces of a man we want to leave with you." He turned and pointed to a loose heap of blankets which slightly disclosed the form of a man beneath. "We gathered him in this morning, about 30 mile up the Stewart, I should judge."
"Stands in need of doctrine," the other man spoke up, "and the meat's spoiling, and we ain't got time for nothing."
"Beggar don't have anything to say. Don't savvy the burro. Looks as he might have been mixing things with a grizzly or something, all battered and gouged, injured internally from the looks of it. Where'll you have him?" Frona, standing by St. Vincent, saw the injured man borne over the crest of the bank and through the crowd. A bronzed hand drooped down, and a bronzed face showed from out the blankets. The bearers halted near them while a decision could be reached as to where he could be carried. Frona felt a sudden fierce grip on her arm. "Look! Look!" St. Vincent was leaning forward and pointing wildly at the injured man. "Look! That scar!" The Indian opened his eyes, and a grin of recognition distorted his face. "It is he! It is he!" St. Vincent, trembling with eagerness, turned upon the crowd. "I call you all to witness. That is the man who killed John Borg." No laughter greeted this, for there was a terrible earnestness in his manner. Bill Brown and the chairman tried to make the Indian talk, but could not. A miner from British Columbia was pressed into service, but his Chinook made no impression. Then Laflitche was called. The handsome breed bent over the man and talked in gutturals which only his mother's heredity made possible. It sounded all one, yet it was apparent that he was trying many tongues. But no response did he draw, and he paused disheartened. As though with sudden recollection, he made another attempt. At once a gleam of intelligence shot across the Indian's face, and his larynx vibrated to similar sounds.
It is the stick talk of the upper white."
La Flitche stopped long enough to explain. Then, with knit brows and stumbling moments when he sought dim remembered words, he plied the man with questions. To the rest, it was like a pantomime, the meaningless grunts and waving arms and facial expressions of puzzlement, surprise, and understanding. At times, a passion wrote itself on the face of the Indian, and a sympathy on the face of La Flitche. Again, by look and gesture, St. Vincent was referred to, and once a sober, mirthless laugh shaped the mouths of them.
"So, it is good," La Flitche said, when the Indian's head dropped back. "This man make true talk. He come from White River way up. He cannot understand. He surprised very much so many white men. He never think so many white men in the world. He die soon. His name Gow. Long time ago, 3 year, this man John Borg go to this man Gow's country. He hunt, he bring plenty meat to the camp, wherefore White River sticks like him. Gow have one squaw, Pisku. By John Borg make preparation to go away. He go to Gow and he say, 'Give me your squaw, we trade. For her I give you many things.' But Gow say no, Pisku good squaw. No man sew moccasin like she. She tan moose skin the best, and make the softest leather. He like Pisku. Then John Borg say he didn't care. He want Pisku. Then they have a skookum big fight, and Pisku go way with John Borg. She no want to go way, but she go anyway. Borg call her Bella and give her plenty good things, but she like Gow all the time."
La Flitche pointed to the scar which ran down the forehead and past the eye of the Indian.
"John Borg, he do that. Long time Gow pretty near die. Then he get well, but his head sick. He don't know nobody. Don't know his father, his mother, or anything. Just like a little baby. Just like that. Then one day, quick, click, something snap, and his head get well all at once. He know his father and mother. He remember Pisku. He remember everything. His father say, 'John Borg go down river.' Then Gow go down river. Springtime. Ice very bad. He very much afraid, so many white men, and when he come to this place he travel by night. Nobody see him tall, but he see everybody. He like a cat see in the dark. Somehow he come straight to John Borg's cabin. He do not know how this was, except that the work he had to do was good work."
St. Vincent pressed Frona's hand, but she shook her fingers clear and withdrew a step.
"He see Pisku feed the dogs, and he have talk with her. That night he come and she open the door. When you know that which was done, St. Vincent do nothing. Borg kill Bella. Gow kill Borg. Borg kill Gow, for Gow die pretty quick. Borg have strong arm. Gow sick inside, all smashed up. Gow no care. Pisku dead. After that he go cross ice to the land. I tell him all you people say it cannot be. No man can cross the ice at that time. He laugh and say that it is, and what is must be. Anyway, he have very hard time, but he get cross all right. He very sick inside. By he cannot walk, he crawl. Long time he come to Stewart River. Can go no more, so he lay down to die. 2 white men find him and bring him to this place. He don't care. He die anyway."
La Flitche finished abruptly, but nobody spoke. Then he added,
"I think Gow damn good man."
Frona came up to Jacob Welse.
"Take me away, father," she said. "I am so tired."
End of chapter 29. Read by Don W. Jenkins, Rancho San Diego, California. shaggybark.blogspot.com. Chapter 30 of A Daughter of the Snows by Jack London. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 30. Next morning, Jacob Welse, for all of the company and his millions in mines, chopped up the day's supply of firewood, lighted a cigar, and went down the island in search of Baron Courbertin. Frona finished the breakfast dishes, hung out the robes to air, and fed the dogs. Then she took a worn Wordsworth from her clothes bag and, out by the bank, settled herself comfortably in a seat formed by 2 uprooted pines. But she did no more than open the book, for her eyes strayed out and over the Yukon to the eddy below the bluffs, and the bend above, and the tail of the spit which lay in the midst of the river. The rescue and the race were still fresh with her, though there were strange lapses here and there of which she remembered little. The struggle by the fissure was immeasurable. She knew not how long it lasted, and the race down Split Up to Roubeau Island was a thing of which her reason convinced her, but of which she recollected nothing. The whim seized her, and she followed Corliss through the 3 days' events, but she tacitly avoided the figure of another man whom she would not name. Something terrible was connected therewith, she knew, which must be faced sooner or later, but she preferred to put that moment away from her. She was stiff and sore of mind as well as of body, and will and action were for the time being distasteful. It was more pleasant even to dwell on Tommy of the bitter tongue and craven heart, and she made a note that the wife and children in Toronto should not be forgotten when the Northland paid its dividends to the Welles. The crackle of a foot on a dead willow twig roused her, and her eyes met St. Vincent's.
"You have not congratulated me upon my escape," he began breezily, "but you must have been dead tired last night. I know I was, and you had that hard pull on the river besides."
He watched her furtively, trying to catch some cue as to her attitude and mood.
"You're a heroine, that's what you are, Frona," he began again with exuberance. "And not only did you save the mailman, but by the delay you wrought in the trial, you saved me. If one more witness had gone on the stand that first day, I should have been duly hanged before Gow put in an appearance. Fine chap, Gow. Too bad he's going to die." "I am glad that I could be of help," she replied, wondering the while what she could say. "And of course I am to be congratulated." "Your trial is hardly a thing for congratulation." She spoke up quickly, looking him straight in the eyes for the moment. "I am glad that it came out as it did, but surely you cannot expect me to congratulate you." "Oh," with long-drawn inflection. "So that's where it pinches." He smiled good-humoredly and moved as though to sit down, but she made no room for him, and he remained standing. "I can certainly explain, if there have been women." Frona had been clenching her hand nervously, but at the word burst out in laughter. "Women?" she queried. "Women?" she repeated. "Do not be ridiculous, Gregory." "After the way you stood by me through the trial," he began reproachfully, "I thought—" "Oh, you do not understand," she said hopelessly. "You do not understand. Look at me, Gregory, and see if I can make you understand. Your presence is painful to me. Your kisses hurt me. The memory of them still burns my cheek, and my lips feel unclean. And why? Because of women, which you may explain away? How little do you understand? But shall I tell you?"
Voices of men came to her from down the river bank and the splashing of water. She glanced quickly and saw Del Bishop guiding a poling boat against the current, and Corliss on the bank, bending to the tow rope.
"Shall I tell you why, Gregory St. Vincent?" she said again. "Tell you why your kisses have cheapened me? Because you broke the faith of food and blanket. Because you broke salt with a man, and then watched that man fight unequally for life without lifting your hand. Why, I had rather you had died in defending him. The memory of you would have been good. Yes, I had rather you had killed him yourself. At least it would have shown there was blood in your body." "So this is what you would call love," he began scornfully, his fretting, fuming devil beginning to rouse. "A fair weather love, truly, but Lord, how we men learn." "I had thought you were well lessoned," she retorted. "What of the other women?" "But what do you intend to do?" he demanded, taking no notice. "I am not an easy man to cross. You cannot throw me over with impunity. I shall not stand for it, I warn you. You have dared do things in this country which would blacken you were they known. I have ears. I have not been asleep. You will find it no child's play to explain away things which you may declare most innocent." She looked at him with a smile which carried pity in its cold mirth, and it goaded him. "I am down. A thing to make jest upon, a thing to pity, but I promise you that I can drag you with me. My kisses have cheapened you, eh? Then how must you have felt at Happy Camp on the Dyea Trail?" As though in answer, Corliss swung down upon them with the tow rope. Frona beckoned a greeting to him. "Vance," she said, "the mail carrier has brought important news to father, so important that he must go outside. He starts this afternoon with Baron Courbertin in La Bijou. Will you take me down to Dawson? I should like to go at once, to-day. He suggested you," she added shyly, indicating St. Vincent. End of Chapter 30. End of A Daughter of the Snows by Jack London. Read by Don W. Jenkins, Rancho San Diego, California. Shaggybark.blogspot.com.